Hi, I'm Lia Carreira, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Winchester School of Art of the University of Southampton in the UK. My research revolves around exhibition histories and digital art practices, and I'm here today to present to you a project I have been researching since 2016, which is the Palais des Beaux Arts in Vienna, Austria. So the Palais des Beaux Arts is a digital project created in 2014 by Bernhard Garnicnig. It was initially described as a historical site for future-thinking art, where artists and curators could develop site-specific projects for a wireless network in a public space. Basically, the Palais was a wireless router where it was placed in the shop across the streets from the building that is actually called Palais des Beaux Arts, situated at Löwengasse 47A in Vienna. So basically, Bernhard never really had access to the building itself, but thought it was an interesting site to build a digital exhibition platform from. The story goes that Bernhard saw the building on his way to the supermarket and was taken by these very particular globe-shaped sculptures that lie on top of the buildings and they resembled the browser icons of the .com era, so that was interesting to him. Bernhard is an Austrian research artist who describes his topic of interest as being a post-digital occupation of institutionality as artistic practice. So the Palais was first and foremost an artist project where he could, in his own words, research what an institution model and practice for web-based art could be. So I'm not going to go deeper into this particular topic because I think Antoinette Lafarge will address this directly in a presentation titled Fictive Museums and Artists as Institution in our panel. But it would be a nice discussion to have. But I just wanted to highlight that the idea of the Palais came from Bernhard's interest in institutionality as an artistic practice and how this could be translated to the digital form. And so not only the artworks that were commissioned reflected on this, but the platform itself was the very embodiment of such practice. So as you can see, this is the first version of their website, and we can find similar design and structures to any other museums with an online presence. So you can find here basically visitor information, an about page, an imprint, and a shop, and so on. And these are all techniques applied to create a digital institutional practice. And as Bernhard would later describe it, the artworks commissioned were also a way of creating a situation that would allow for the Palais to become an institutional practice in itself. So in a way, the Palais not only works as an appropriation of a physical building named Palais des Beaux Arts in Vienna, but also as an appropriation of digital institutional cultures themselves. Initially, although the Palais had this online presence through the website, the exhibition space was in fact offline, and visitors needed to be physically present at that space to be able to access and experience the artworks and the exhibitions that they made. So in a way, Bernhard created this museum without walls, which, although set completely digital, still had a very strong connection to the physicality of, let's say, the original Palais des Beaux Arts, but when no one actually could go in. Nowadays, with Seth Weiner as the new creative director of the Palais, the artworks and related projects are all online and accessible through the main website. But going full digital did not signify a complete distance from the physical building. Instead, actually, Seth rather shifted the focus towards the history of the building itself. And on the new website, we now have this one new featured section which provides the timeline and historical context of the building. As we can see through this now very narrative-oriented platform, the building was built in 1909 and housed the Atelier Bachwitz, an international publishing house that produced and distributed fashion, design, and lifestyle magazines since the 1898. It was initiated and led by Bernhard Bachwitz together with his family and daughters up until the rise of the National Socialism. In 1938, the company fell under the rule of the Nuremberg race laws and underwent Aryanization. So this meant that the board, which was comprised mostly of the Bachwitz family, was replaced and their publishing rights revoked. So many of the works commissioned by Seth revolved around working with the historical elements of the original Palais des Beaux Arts, especially the publications, as you can see here. So in this way, there's a focus on seeing the commissions also as a form of restitution in a way, by establishing the origins of a sized building, a practice and life story, but also by directly restating the publishing rights, for example, for the magazines. So there are several projects that later on you can all look for yourselves and experience online, which are quite interesting. So while Bernhard was interested in working through the relationship between forms of institutionality and the digital realm, Seth is now focused on re-establishing the historical or the legacy, as they would put it, of the building. And as Seth would describe it, he is interested in recuperating and representing the multiple layers, that is, the use of the Palais des Beaux Arts, for example, as a title for the building itself in 1909, which was set to incorporate the spirit of the Beaux Arts by the Atelier Bachwitz, and later the seizure by the Nazi occupation, and now the repurpose of the title and also the digital building by Bernhard. So these are almost like composed a palimpsest of some form. But in the end, the institutional frame still remains. And it is through this institutional framing that this shift of focus is, in fact, possible. Bernhard would describe the Palais in a way that, let me shift this here. It is a manifestation of a kind of built thing that exists in an environment that leads us to ask questions and say things about institutionality and about other institutions and about the nature of institutions. So what Seth now is doing is trying to find ways perhaps of expressing his concerns and his tendencies in an institutional form. And I believe that this is done through appropriation as an artistic gesture. To understand a little bit what that means, appropriation as an artistic gesture, a good comparison would be with the cases of Walker Evans and Sherry Levine. I think this would make it quite clear, I think a little bit more clearer. So many of you would recognize this image here as being Walker Evans' 1936 recession photographic documentation project, which was later rephotographed by the artist Sherry Levine in 1979. So Sherry, she rephotographed the actual book catalog, and most recently, this image was then copied digitally by the artist Michael Mendebeck in 2001. And also other artists used these images as reference also to do their own appropriations. So visually, it looks like the same object, that is Evans' photographs, but both Levine and Mandeberg were able to reclaim ownership over it through reproduction technologies. In the case of Sherry Levine, she rephotographed it, and Mandeberg through creating digital copies. And by doing so, they were able to reframe the context of the original object. So by reframing, that is, dislocating the object from its specific site and time, they were able to address other issues that were more pertinent to their own practice and context. My point being is that in a similar way, at first the Palais was this online webpage and on-site exhibition where they were able to shift our gaze from a somewhat forgotten historic building to the questioning of digital institutionalized practices by making use of representational forms of the object and the space, such as, for example, the images of the building itself, or the maps and text and so on, while simultaneously keeping a connection to the physicality of the building. And later, the same tool, let's call it, the Palais as a digital platform, was used to shift our gaze from matters of digital production to discuss more directly the building as a historical figure, re-establishing the connection between the digital platform and the physical space through mainly a narrative-based appropriation, let's say. So in the end, the Palais as this digital platform becomes this operative tool where that can frame and reframe the physical building through appropriation. So I will leave you at that. I hope you find this project interesting, and then that you're able to later on access the Palais des Beaux Arts link and see for yourself. And I thank the Museum Without Walls Committee for the chance to present this to you. And I hope the discussion, to have this discussion further in the panel session on the 8th of September. So see you then.